So hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back. We're just taking another minute or two to get our two next speakers connected. But next, you are going to be able to learn about reviewing military and medical records and creating chronologies, which is one of my favorite things to do. So I think it's going to be fantastic. We're going to hear from Holly Christian from Detroit Mercy and our president of NLS VCC, Matt Wilcut from Sutton Snipes. So we're very excited. How's it going, Matt, with the technology?
I think I might have to get started without Holly, just so we can stay on track. Not that I'm not dealing with cat problems of my own. Hopefully you can hear me over the purring, but we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully Holly can jump in here in a second. We're set to cover, as Michelle mentioned, reviewing military and medical records. So let me go ahead and now I am going to ask, just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, Michelle. I'm going to share my screen, but in a different way.
Yeah, there we go.
Is that readable? That's not too small. Okay.
That's very readable. Looks great.
All right, excellent. So I am going to be covering, well, first of all, before we talk about what I'll be covering, my name is Matt Wilcut. I am the current president of the board of the consortium. So again, thank you all for being here today. I am insanely jealous of all of you students. I never got the opportunity to do any kind of clinical experience like this. I did elder law clinic, but knowing that I would immediately after law school go into veterans law and have been there ever since, I obviously could have done with some veterans clinic experience. So just know I'm going to live vicariously through your experiences, and I hope to see some of you continue in the field. So I'm in private practice now. Firm is Sutton Snipes. We're a new practice. We're a VA exclusive. We just formed this past January, and what we are a couple of different lawyers from another nonprofit that worked at the courts that did CAVC representation, and myself, who I've only ever done agency work before the VA itself. So the regional office, board level, not at the courts. I'm not filing briefs. I've never been before, and hope I'll never be before Judge Allen. That's my goal, is to prevent myself from ever needing to be before Judge Allen. But that's what we do. And so I'm going to give you a few tips and go through what it's like to review civilian medical records, and where I need to, I think I'm going to have to let you know, obviously clinic procedures dictate and override anything I say. I don't want any of the professors on the line to say, but come back to me and have their students say, but the bearded man told me that's what I should do. Well, no, listen, obviously if there's clinic procedures that state otherwise, or even if you are able to do some of these, I would still perhaps part of these ask your professor if it's okay to do that. And I think it'll be obvious which of those portions I'm talking about. So going over reviewing civilian medical records, and then hopefully we can get Holly on here to cover the military side of things. So I'm going to start with what I think would be the most generally applicable, which is going to be reviewing VA medical center records. I would say out of my practice, it's probably 90% that the significant portion of the medical records are coming from the VA directly. And that makes it somewhat easier in the sense that I'll get into, but especially for clinics and private attorneys that have access to electronic records, that makes it even that much more especially easy and simple to get the records. So hold on, let me see if I can make Holly co-host while I'm, here we go. All right. So if your clinic, either staff or professor directly, if they let you know they have access to these VA medical records. There may be some questions that may come up even during the course of the representation, because even though for this presentation's purpose, I'm not going to go over too much about getting the records. I want to assume for the purpose of this presentation, you've got the perfect set of records, at least at the time that you sat down to do this job of building a chronology and reviewing them. You don't really suspect that there's any additional VA medical records or any other any other medical records in general, but obviously that's with the caveat that unless your investigation and reviewing the medical records reveals otherwise. And what that looks like sometimes is a record that mentions he went to the local ER, or they name a facility that you may or may not be familiar with, or they mention some facility visited in the past, and you look in your collection of records and notice, well, we don't have that. So otherwise, I'm not really going to cover obtaining these records, but I am going to mention a few benefits to what your clinic has if they have electronic access, so that you're aware of it, so that you know that you can ask for these types of questions if they do come up. So what you're looking at here is it's called a listing of the Capri remote facilities. And so all of the VA facilities around the country are somewhat siloed, unfortunately, but there's these parent facilities that essentially are the ones that are the umbrella facilities for the state. And most states don't have that many. I'm looking at the list that's on there. Of course, you would expect New York to have a lot. Pennsylvania looks to have a lot. North Carolina has 4 or 5. But in fact, just because I know it in particular, North Carolina has something like 40 or 50 VA facilities. It's just that they're children facilities for the most part underneath these parent facilities. So in my local area's case, a lot of my clients will say, I go to the Kernersville VA, and you'll look and you'll notice on the list of North Carolina facilities that Kernersville is not on that list. And that's because it's actually underneath the parent facility of Salisbury. So I say that to tell you, for both briefing purposes, doing your chronologies, doing your reviews, and also especially helpful for judges when you're reviewing medical records on the record in a live setting. If the client mentions a facility and it's a VA facility, you're going to do better to name the parent facility, because that's how the judge and any other VA employee is going to be able to find it. Now, the thing that's missing from this list of VA medical facilities, even on top of what I said about all the children facilities, are what are called the vet centers. And vet center records are just not kept in this electronic system, in particular under Capri. I am not aware of a way to get electronic access to those. And it's in fact sometimes even difficult to get them generally. But vet centers are mental health only facilities that are run by the VA, and they do have some eligibility requirements before someone can get treated there, but just know that they are not covered. So if your claim raises it, and mental health may be a claim, you want to make sure and ask, and not just assume that this will include any vet center records. And this is more of just what I was mentioning. Now, when I mentioned that they were somewhat siloed, what I was getting at is none of the records are all together, meaning you can't just say, give me all the records that a veteran has been to from the VA in general. What's going to happen is you're going to have to go to each of those parent facilities, each of the one that was on the list before, and you're going to have to get the records from each of those individually. So if I have and have had, and you will find that it's maybe more common than you think, veterans who have traveled over their lives. This includes visits to ERs when they're out of town, going to their local VA, or just someone who's been well traveled in their life, moved around a lot. You shouldn't be surprised to see a lot of VA. I think the most I've ever seen on one particular veteran, it's still under 10, but that would be a lot of VA facilities to have to get records from. And so there's this thing called the Master Patient Index. I just mention it because, again, what's helpful about it is it will indicate what is the last set of records that were added for that particular. You have to get into it a little bit. And again, your clinician would have access to this, you wouldn't, but they would be able to say if, for example, there were more recent records added. We know this individual hasn't been to Biloxi, Mississippi, I think since 2010. They haven't been to Arizona since 2016, so we shouldn't expect anything there. They had been to another place in Arizona, but not since 2013. And then I'm going to assume that the majority of their treatment and evidence for the case, if it's a relatively recently filed case, is going to be at Salisbury. So I see that Holly's joined us. Good. I'll let her introduce herself later in a bit. So the good thing about VA medical records and reviewing VA medical records is that they are already in what's called OCR format. And I don't even remember what OCR stands for. Optical character recognition, I think. Okay, so I did remember. I'm going to nerd out during this whole presentation, by the way. But it's so that the computer program that you're using, most likely either a dedicated PDF program, if your clinic uses it, or even some browsers have the ability to already recognize what's in the VA medical records. And this is because these are electronic records for the most part. Now, I didn't really make a slide for it, but provided that there are paper records that are old enough, then of course this isn't going to apply. But the vast majority of your records will probably be electronic, and they will look kind of like what you see on the middle of the screen there. And that's also one of the benefits of reviewing VA medical records in general, is just there's going to be a common format. You're going to see it. You're going to know it. You're going to be able to, if you needed to fake or come up with an example of, maybe your professors could do this. If they needed to come up with an example medical record, they could make a very convincing, easy one, because these aren't very creative documents, but that's the benefit of being able to review them simply and easily and find what's needed. But the OCR format in particular is helpful. And what you're looking at here is that I use a program called Kofax Power PDF. And so we have to pay for that. That's a paid purchase item in addition to any other expenses of running the firm, but it's worth its salt because of this search functionality that it gives me. And I didn't show it, but there's all kinds of advanced search functionality. I can say, give me everything that looks like a phone number, everything that looks like a social security number. I could run it on batch files. There's a lot of great things, but obviously this is one of those areas where I'm talking about whatever your clinic has available, that's what you should use. Now, where you might want to ask the question and not assume is whether your law school, or if you're affiliated with like a larger university, whether they make available generally just other kinds of software, right? If they give you licenses to Adobe or any other kind of PDF program, and as long as your clinician, professor doesn't tell you that you can't use it, or if, again, better to get affirmative permission ahead of time than forgiveness. But those are I'm just letting you know that there's ways that you could take advantage of what your school's resources are. And that's one of the ways. If you are relying on your own, no separate PDF program available, and all you can use is a browser, browsers are good enough. And a specific browser, in particular, Firefox, has very good PDF search capabilities. Let me see if, well, no, I'll get through that later. But it wouldn't look anything like what I've got up here on the screen. So when I do a search through VA medical records and I put in a term, what I like about the specific program that I use is that it comes up with you get a very short summary of every listing that comes up. This was in particular, I think maybe a 1,500 or 1,700 page file. And so it is helpful for that kind of purpose. The other thing I want to mention about what wouldn't be here real quickly, and this isn't even really something that I'm going to mention a few times. I don't handle this type of claim, so I can't speak to it, but I'm sure that some of the clinics do. So I wanted to make sure to at least mention it in passing. There's a claim called an 1151, which is a kind of a tort claim. And I've never handled one. I wouldn't be the person to ask about it. But what I have been told is that quality assurance records, which might be helpful for that purpose, which is when the VA goes in and audits their own treating providers, meaning if a recent procedure was performed, an 1151 tort is basically like something went unforeseeably wrong. The procedure went wrong. I now have this disability, which I should not have been expected to have from that procedure. Quality assurance records, you wouldn't find that obviously in just these generic sets. So that's another thing that might be helpful. It has come up in a couple of service connection cases, but I'm not sure I needed the quality assurance. But when for some period, one diagnosis is given and then the diagnosis disappears and suddenly another diagnosis takes its place. Like if you're trying to figure out whether something was a mistaken diagnosis, maybe the quality assurance records would be helpful there. But for those of you, and I'm sure I'm just preaching to the choir of this generation of students that know, but essentially what I'm talking about is Control F functionality for these records, right? The ability to just search through them at a basic level. And what I really want to get into is like, how does that make it useful for your review of these medical records? So a good place to start is the problem list. And so you could just Control F or Command F on a Mac for the word problem list, and it'll shoot you right to the most recent one. You could even go through them over time and see what has dropped off. I don't think they've ever print what is an inactive problem list. So I don't think there's a quick way in the records themselves to find out what has dropped off. Although, again, your clinician, if they have electronic access, would have access to a specific tab in Capri called inactive problem list. It's not greatly utilized by the VA. So that's another caveat, though. I don't know that I've ever used it. I've just noticed that, when you look at the problem list, you'll see if hopefully that someone changed the diagnosis or not. But what I'd like to point out in this case is specifically, so, this is a fairly long list under the problem list. So this individual has a good number of conditions. A lot of them appear to be serious conditions. But for a mental health claim in particular, I see at least three, just off the top of my head, three different kinds of mental health conditions. And so you may think, okay, well, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to review these records. It's PTSD. Also noting that you're going to have to perhaps spell that out, post-traumatic stress disorder, include the hyphen. If that's necessary, again, that's going to be program dependent. If your program doesn't allow you to do kind of wildcard searching. But just off the top of my head, this list would present a whole host of things that you might need to review if it was a mental health claim that you were reviewing. And in fact, that was the case for this particular client. Another place to look, and in fact, kind of one of your first issue spotting things that you can do, is look at the code sheet. So the code sheet is this document. There's nothing else that looks like it. So this is what the code sheet is. It's a code sheet that indicates, some general demographic information at the top, what they're subject to compensation. This is just a portion of it, but it'll have everything that they're service connected, how that is currently labeled, meaning if there was a change in diagnosis, it may indicate formally rated as in parentheticals, but sometimes they may in fact just change it outright to be the updated. So for example, if this individual has been service connected for the cervical neck condition since 2019, but just in a hypothetical, imagine they've been service connected for 40 years. It may have begun as just the cervical strain, and then all of that degenerative arthritis and other things may have been added later. So it is supposed to reflect what the current the current reading of it is, or at least the last time it was included on an adjudication, right? So the VA doesn't update it in real time, and they certainly don't go through and bother themselves to look at the VA medical records if that's all of the issue is whether that's correct or not. But if it matters, and if it helps, I have had, unfortunately, a non-zero amount of cases where just getting the reviewers of the file to come off this listing and actually use what's in the medical records was a problem. So that's a good place to just compare these two things. Does it look similar to the way it's listed in the problem list as it does on the code sheet? Which one's more correct? Which one is the one that you're going to include on anything that is of substance related to the case? And we're going to get into what those things might be to include a chronology in a second. I want to spend the majority of the time that I have left talking about keywords. And again, the big caveat here is when you're reviewing VA medical records or any medical records in general, I find it's helpful to have some idea of what you'd like to get out of it and how much time you have to do that, right? So if you've been assigned by your clinician to do a file review and there's no direction given to you to where to start or anything like that, again, maybe the code sheet or the recent decision, the conditions from the recent decision are where you would start. If you have only time to focus on one issue and handle them one by one.
Matt,
yes.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you, I know, but participants are telling us that your screen share is really fuzzy and they can't see any of it.
Okay.
So can you stop share and try and reshare? And then if that doesn't work, you could maybe email it to one of us and we could share for you.
I can. Let me do this. I want to make sure I don't share the presenter view. I think. No,
Yeah,
my own.
that
Okay,
is
my own
so
view
much
disappeared.
better.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
That's way better. Thank you so much.
All right. So, and these materials will be up later, but thank you so much for letting me know. Yeah, I definitely want you guys to be able to, especially this slide. So even more so than any other previous slide that I did, I would want you guys to be able to see this. This was actually not taken from anything VA related. I think it was from a University of Michigan research report on software they were building to review medical records, but it was very helpful for my purposes because, again, it's going to depend on the task at hand as to how you're going to review the medical records, right? Are you being tasked to build a chronology? Are you being asked to update something? Are you being asked to find something or just confirm something? Did the client ask for a specific set of records, which is often very helpful? As Judge Allen mentioned, listening to the client means not just, although I'm guilty of this sometimes, not just saying, I'm the expert, I know that I can handle this case. If I just get a hold of the records, I can do all the work from there, right? And some clients will say that, but a lot of clients will ask for their own records, and you can say, listen, if you see something troubling, let me know. I'm going to be in there looking, you could be in there looking. And in fact, that does lead to a lot of places where the client will say, well, this shouldn't be, this shouldn't say that I'm employed. I think that's why my TDIU keeps getting denied. And sure enough, we can get that corrected and get that removed. But thinking about how or why you're reviewing for the medical records, do you have the medical description? Has the client come to you with really no treatment, no diagnosis established? There may be treating and you see, or what will end up happening is that pain is mentioned, but there just hasn't been any imaging or any confirmatory investigation. The doctors are kind of hand waving it, and they may make some notes, but they're not really actively treating for it. And then, of course, do you need to know about the treatment for it? So some of the ratings, in fact, rely on knowing the treatment itself, whether it's occurred or at what severity level. So, a knee replacement, and some kind of surgery, some kind of test confirming malignancy, those kinds of things. So What I like about this is it's already color coded. And I'm going to use the color codes to mean the things that that I want to point out. So in blue, this is to me what looks like the how or why, meaning a client may come to you and say, I don't want to use in service because I want to stick to VA medical records, but they may say, well, I already had a trick knee and I fell off the ladder the other day and I've really injured my neck now. And I want to know if that's a claim I could file. You could look for fall, ladder, any kinds of keywords that would, quickly get you to where that is. Of course, if it was more recent, then, you could kind of cheat a little bit just looking at the more recent, but let's say it's a fall that was years ago and they want to know, or they're just now getting around to appealing it or claiming it, whatever it may be. But blue is why. Green is a medical description. So if in that same example of someone with a bad knee who falls and injures their neck, well, the knee is not the important part of that. The neck is. And so you may need to look at the problem list, anything that they had applied for before that might show up on the code sheet that looks like a neck condition, and see if you could search for that. Barring that, you might look for fracture, strain. You'll come to know, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but you'll come to know the kinds of ways that things are described that might help you, find that thing. In this case, in the picture, it's a dog bite. A puncture wound is what results. So think about it that way. And then the treatment was an irrigation. And I don't know that that would ever really be completely material, except maybe in an 1151 if they did not irrigate or did not clean properly a wound, and then that wasn't noted, and so that led to some kind of infection or something. That's just an example of, like, for example, you might look for replacement, replaced, surgical, surgery. You might look for treatment, and so just in broader senses, think about how you might use those keywords to get to the records you need. Now I'm going to pull up, let's see, I need to do another screen share then, because I want to make sure it comes up right. Actually, let me stop this share and then I'm going to do a different one. Okay, so you should see, let me bring it over here now that I can use it. You should see sample and patient health record. Is that, confirmation? Okay. So this is an example. I literally Googled, example medical record. So this comes up first. And what I was talking about with VA medical records, now you're going to start getting some wishy-washiness based on the provider that gives you the records. So now, instead of everything having a format and knowing what it looks like, VA facility to VA facility, year after year, no matter what the case, now you're just in really no man's land where everybody's got their own proprietary format. Over the years, they change, facilities change names and formats, they gobble up other facilities, and you've got a mixture here, which is actually good, that I like, of printed materials and handwritten materials. And although I might initially have suspected that the handwritten materials were older, this is actually all from the same period or same hospital visit. And you're not supposed to be able to read what I'm just briefly going through. I'm just letting you know the variety of different kinds of claims or different records that are in here. But these are all from one visit, a particular inpatient stay. The difference is, when you ask for private medical records, you can ask for everything, or you can ask for just the notes, just the substantive notes, just, what, if somebody asks for a copy of their medical records, what would be the default of what they would be given? And so there's times where you may need, although I do not default to asking for everything, because they will even sometimes call you, the providers, and say, well, it's the difference between 100 pages from the last year and 6,000 pages. And also it's going to cost you a couple $100 to do that. And so generally what would be in the handwritten pages are, the nurses coming in, checking blood pressure, checking vitals. They have, especially if somebody's in an inpatient stay, that can add up very quickly, as can even the electronic records. So just know that. But what I really want to show is, depending on the format that you're provided it, and it's good that it was not provided in this context. I'm using Edge here, Microsoft Edge, which is not my favorite, but I couldn't get it to work in Firefox to show you what would be available. But if I Control F, you'll see that this box came up here that I'm circling around with my mouse here. And so if I do the word sample, you can see that's highlighted, which is nice. And it highlights both occurrences, and it'll even switch between where in the record that is. This is, again, just all general command, Control F, searching if you've done that. Nothing really too complicated there, but Microsoft Edge is not going to be my recommendation to anyone, because there's no advanced searching. You can't do anything else. And there just is. All right. So this is one of the things. If you open this, if you did the same Control F in Firefox, you would be given a couple of different options to take advantage of. Now,
we're not seeing your Control F, so you might need to reshare.
Well, Control F is just what brings up, like, if you notice that box appearing and disappearing. Can you see that?
We're seeing that.
Wonder if it's not displaying the controls in. Well, you'll just have to imagine, right? Or you could follow along or try this. It's a good exercise later. So I'm sorry, I need to move something so I don't get too far ahead on time. I want to make sure we get Holly in here. The rest of this document is not OCR. That's just the way this example came. So I actually had to use, again, the pay program that I have comes with very good OCR capabilities. And what it did is it turned it into an OCR. So maybe you can't see this, but if in this example here, where it's got the word hospital, if I do a search for the word hospital, it's telling me 0 out of 0, that we can't find it in this document. But if I go here at hospital, it's telling me that there's 58 times that it occurred. So again, that's just what OCR enabling a document that did not previously have it makes available to you, is to do this keyword searching ability. That's really the biggest difference between reviewing VA medical records and private medical records, is, again, just this no man's land, proprietary perhaps, but just you're going to get a different experience every time. All right, I don't need to share that anymore. I need to go back to my PowerPoint now. All right. You should see a little thing here about building chronologies. Sorry, it disappeared on my end. There it is. This is the single slide. This is really the crux of the presentation, because once you know all of that, you still need to stop and think about, again, the task at hand. Who is this for? Is this for clinic use? Is this for your own personal use? This is, you're just making your own notes, although I would caution against it. And it may even be seen as some initiative for you to volunteer, a chronology you've made, even without being tasked it. Maybe it's helpful to others as you come along, but because these cases take so long, you may in fact be creating the first chronology or updating a chronology that already exists. But the difference in whether this is ever intended for other eyes other than the clinic is definitely going to make a difference between how that's formatted, what you put in it, what you don't, how you make citations. So, as opposed to review by a medical professional who you're being asked to perform maybe a DBQ alongside it, or a nexus. And then, of course, a claim type will determine as well really just meaning what's the length of the chronology that you want to build. So do you need to go all the way back to all time immemorial and do a full service connection chronology? Is this an increased only claim? So, you're just identifying the time from the increase forward. Maybe you want to establish some baseline before that. And then again, the caveat about the 1151 claim, where I think what you would want to do is clearly establish some baseline before that procedure, before the tort occurred. And the other thing to think about is, not only is this going to be seen by anybody else's eyes, is it ever going to be intended to be submitted? I submit chronologies. I find that they're helpful. I've been told that they're helpful by CMP examiners. So the difference then is still whether you're going to, is it going to be a private medical professional that sees it, who may not be familiar with the VA process, so you can't be using coded language or acronyms or citing to VBMS or things that the VA claims examiner would have access to. So I give an example here about consider citing to including the submitted date or how VBMS has it labeled, right? So when I'm building a chronology, I don't write it out long-term in December 12, 2012, VA medical records. I'm going to use exactly how I can see it. And if your clinician has it available to you that way, that's fine. But again, I think clinic procedure is going to dictate very heavily here, but this is just my own personal way of doing it. And that will help especially again, if you're doing a live hearing before a judge or a hearing officer, you can give them a page number of a date of a named document, and you're going to be able to see that easily rather than just referencing the evidence in general. You can also repurpose these chronologies one way or the other, depending on whether you want to change the audience later. So a very good office memo can always be changed to be something that you would give to a medical professional. The only difference is you're probably going to remove all of those citations to VBMS, and you're just going to, in whatever medium you're able to give the examiner any information, you're just going to reference and cite to that. But you might keep a shadow list of how those citations might transfer, so that when you submit the examiners, you could then say, well, what they were pointing out was in this document, which was submitted 5 years ago, but nobody seemed to notice, that kind of thing. And your clinic may already have a preferred template, so obviously go with them. Holly's going to show you a really good example in a little bit about hers. And I'm just going to breeze through this. Sometimes I don't find this to be very helpful, but there are sometimes some chronologies that the VA does for their examiners. These are called VA Form 2507, Request for Physical Examinations. Before this presentation, I searched through and I was able to batch search through all of the 2507s. There were hundreds in the files that I had. It took me probably 10, 15 minutes before I gave up and said, I can't even find one that I like as a good example, I'm just going to make a slide that says probably not a good example. There probably is for the CMP examiners not being provided, which goes really as a great segue to Mike and Megan's presentation. There probably isn't a great narrative here then. And that might be your opportunity to be providing that. If I look at this example and they just say, he's claiming PTSD, we've conceded combat, do an exam. I mean, that's basically the chronology that's being provided here. And so just a few more miscellaneous tips. In addition to law school electronic programs that I talked about, you might want to take advantage of any medical resources that you are able to take advantage of. I thought about taking even like a community college anatomy and just basics to medical science kind of courses when I started this. I still think it would be useful. I just never found the time, and I've just kind of winged it. But I always keep basically just, and I don't have access to this as a private practitioner, but I just keep Google close to where I can Google things that come up medically that I do not understand, which is every day. So that will never change. VA has a tool, but that's not really going to be helpful for you guys. And I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to skip my interactive portion. I'm going to let Holly go ahead and introduce herself and get into it her portion. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Holly Christian. I am the new Tony A. Wisney Foundation Veterans Law Clinic Fellow here at UD Mercy's Veterans Law Clinic. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen because we are going to be talking about in-service records as opposed to Matt's portion, which was on post-service medical records. So I will share my screen here. Great, can everyone see that? Awesome. All right, so before we begin, let's just do a quick overview of what we're going to learn today. Hopefully by the end of this session, you will be able to prepare records, summaries, and chronologies in an efficient manner that saves you time and makes your advocacy skills better, and so that we don't end up like Charlie Day in the situation pictured on my screen. So we're going to give an introduction quickly about in-service records, what those are, kind of the content, the format, how to create a chronology, the different types of documents that are within an OMPF or official military personnel file, as well as types of service treatment records or service medical records. If we have time, we'll do a quick records review exercise, and then at the end, we will have time for questions for Matt and I. And you can drop those in the chat as the presentation is going on to either Matt, myself, or one of the hosts. So let's first start out with just a kind of overview. So you all might have gotten your cases already, started digging into the records, and found that there's numerous amounts of pages and records that we need to summarize. Sometimes you might get a small extract of a military record or a service treatment record. Sometimes you might get hundreds and thousands of pages. And depending on when the veteran served, you might get a wonderful CD in the mail that has a PDF that's password protected and encrypted, and it'll have chapters of the different records that are contained within the file. And then you can kind of breeze through those chapters and organize yourself that way. Or you might get some scanned, handwritten notes from doctors and from military professionals. And the pages might be scanned wrong or illegible, or you can't read the copies. So really kind of the format of your records is going to depend on, the different branches, what time they served in. So just be prepared that, one case's records is not going to necessarily look exactly like another case's records. You're also going to see what we refer to as alphabet soup with the different acronyms that the medical field and military field loves to use. I myself keep a running list of military, medical, and VA acronyms. And you might want to start a running list for yourself or see if, I know that the Veterans Benefits Manual, which I'm definitely going to plug that, that's what we use day in and day out, and it's a wonderful resource for anyone in this field. They also have a list of various common medical and military abbreviations. And specifically, I wanted to plug chapter 16.3 of the Veterans Benefits Manual of the most recent version, because that gives really an in-depth overview on how and in what order you should be looking through a veteran's C file, including military and medical records, as well as post-service medical records. So that's a really good resource for records review. Now, the content. When we receive this wonderful OMPF and STRs, what's it going to look like? What all is included? Well, the two main components are the OMPF, like I said, the official military personnel file, and then either some people refer to it as the service medical records or the service treatment records. So those are the two main components. The OMPF should, hopefully, if you get all of the records in your first records request and you don't get an extract, it should contain, any official military records on file for that veteran that are able to be released to an advocate. the STRs should contain the medical records from the veteran from their time in service specifically. Although sometimes if a veteran was potentially, hospitalized in a private facility or received private medical treatment, you might want to make sure that you're not missing out on those records and that you're requesting those as well, because they may or may not be included in those in-service medical treatment records. And moving on, we have an example of a chronology. Before you begin to look at the records and before we get into the nitty-gritty of what information is contained where, you want to make sure that you're organizing yourself. This chronology it's a redacted chronology from a former Veterans Law Clinic student. And as you can see, it has the important components of a record review chronology. It has page numbers, it has direct quotes, it has a summary of the information, and it has dates. So I like to, when I'm reviewing records for the first time or I'm getting acquainted with a case, I like to start off with kind of a skeleton outline of what my chronology is going to look like. So the first time I go through, I'm going to try to get context of, what did this veteran's basic service look like? What was the basic timeline? When did they enter? When did they exit the military? Where were their stations and their locations at various times? And that basic timeline might also help you and assist you in interviewing the veteran. They might not remember the dates, the times, but they might say, oh, I remember it happened when I was stationed in Germany. Well, if you look and see that, they were stationed in Germany from XYZ date to XYZ date, you can kind of narrow down that timeline, and it might help refresh the veteran's memory and assist with your interviewing as well. So once you've kind of gone through the first stage of, let me get the basic story, let me get the basic content or context of the veteran's service, you'll want to go through and get an in-depth review, a detailed picture of that veteran's time in service. And of course, in the back of your mind, you're always going to want to be thinking, what are the claims that I need to prove and what evidence do I need to be finding? But, if you're going through and trying to get a clear picture of the veteran's history, that should assist you in getting that in-depth chronology or record summary done for the in-service records. I like to follow up with questions with the client after I've done a chronology to fill in any missing details and see what all the military records aren't saying. How can I read between the lines here? Because not everything is documented in the military, and not everything is documented correctly in the military. You will come to find out. So it's important to get the veterans' information as well to kind of corroborate the veteran's statements or the interview information, and see and make sure that you're getting the full picture of what was going on in service. You're also, like I said, going to want to pull out, either flag physically or through an OCR tab or a PDF tab, any kind of potential positive evidence. I'm a big fan of putting direct quotes within a chronology if they're really helpful, specifically for medical records. Veteran complains of right knee pain. You might want to put in certain direct quotes within your chronology if you might want to use that in your brief later. Because remember, like Matt said, what's our audience? Are we using this chronology to submit it to the VA, or are we using it for our own purposes within our own briefing and memos and advocacy writing? Are we using it to structure our interview with our client? Always be in mind what's the audience and what's the purpose of this chronology, so that you can fit that into your process. And that being said, Matt and I had a long discussion about page numbers and making sure that your page numbers are adequately described, because you might get a PDF and the PDF page number is different than the physical page number that's written on that document. So make sure that when you're doing your chronology, you're noting, this is based on PDF numbers, or this is based on the number that is physically typed or physically written on the document itself. You also will want to look for patterns. Patterns are really important, especially when you're talking about behavioral changes. I like to look at, okay, so we see between the enlistment March 22nd, 1977, and his first unauthorized absence, it looks like he did okay for a few months. And then, we have an unauthorized absence within quick succession of each other. So make sure that you're also looking for patterns. That's something that the chronology really assists with. Moving on, okay, OMPF documents. What is contained in an OMPF? Lots of things, but let's start out with the DD-214 or the Veterans Discharge Papers. I took a sample DD-214 offline, and I physically highlighted, where my eyes go to when I first get a DD-214 to help you all out. And these are specifically important for VA character of discharge determinations and discharge upgrades. So if a veteran in your clinic indicates that they have bad paper or less than fully honorable discharge status, if they need a discharge determination or a discharge upgrade, that's kind of one of the first documents that you want to have eyes on to figure out a merit assessment and get the kind of brief snapshot of that veteran's overall service. And that's really what the DD-214 document is. It's a discharge document. A lot of times, homeless or indigent veterans, this might be the only piece of paper that they've held on to. They might have their DD-214, but not their birth certificate, because the DD-214 is such an important document. So this is really where you want to get a snapshot of the veteran's service. So let's walk through really quickly what information is contained in the document and how can it be helpful. Well, the character of service is going to help you determine, it may help determine the veteran's eligibility for VA benefits. The dates of active service and the dates of foreign service, that is going to help you figure out eligibility for certain VA benefits that are dependent on that veteran's length of service, or whether or not they served during a different time period. For example, did they serve at least one day during a war period as outlined by the VA? Are they able to apply for certain benefits that have those guidelines? Their primary specialty is also important, because not only does it tell you what the veteran's day-to-day might have looked like, what they were in training for, but it could hint to specific exposure. So was the veteran, in combat? And is that important to put in a potential PTSD claim? Or were they exposed to loud noises and you want to submit a hearing loss claim? So that's why, their primary specialty, sometimes the veterans call it an MOS as well. That's important to look at for different exposures. The record or statement of active service, it tells you the amount of time that the veteran spent on active duty during the period of service that's covered by that DD-214 form. And typically it'll also provide you with, if the veteran had served prior, what that amount was, their total active service, their inactive service, and their foreign service, like we said. And so you also want to see, if there's prior service shown, make sure that the records from that prior service period have been requested and that you've got eyes on that as well. As far as awards and accolades, kind of further along on the document, certain awards indicate that a veteran might be subject to specific VA benefits rules. So if you have a Purple Heart medal or a combat action ribbon, that can show that the veteran served in combat. A Vietnam service medal indicates obviously that the veteran served in the Vietnam theater of operations during the war. So what are we thinking when we want to try to prove that a veteran served in Vietnam? Potential Agent Orange exposure. So those awards and accolades can help you corroborate specific types of claims. It's also important when you're trying to prove the character of service or the quality of service in a discharge upgrade, which, quick plug for Margaret Kuzma's discharge upgrade recording. I've been to many of her trainings. They're wonderful. So if you do have a bad paper vet, if you do have a discharge upgrade case, even if you don't and you're interested in this and you're learning about it in your clinic, I highly suggest you go and watch that recording on the consortium's website. And then lastly, I wanted to go over the remarks. So that section can include information about the veteran's foreign service, but it also might just be kind of a catch-all category for certain things. It can include information from a different block on the form that they didn't have enough room for, like additional awards and things like that. And I don't want to go too much into you know, the ins and outs of bad paper, because I think that Margaret Kuzma probably covers that as well in her presentation. But just remember that if you are dealing with a veteran that is, you're looking into a character of discharge determination claim or discharge upgrade claim, time lost can indicate if the amount of time or the period of time that they potentially went AWOL or spent in the brig when they were, you know, incarcerated by the military justice system. That's what the brig typically denotes. And then also the narrative reason for separation, as well as the separation code and the separation authority. You're going to want to Google that. You're going to want to research that and look it up, because it can give you more insight into why the veteran was discharged, what process did they go through, and what authority did the military have to discharge them in the way that they did, whether it was administrative or punitive discharge. You're also going to want to look at the reentry code, which is 1 through 4, and it denotes, you know, whether the veteran would be recommended for reentry or kind of like barred from reentry, or, you know, not really recommended for reentry or reenlistment. And sometimes veterans come to clinics or legal service organizations wondering if they can get help with a waiver from a recruiter or help with a military records correction so that they can then reenlist. Okay, so what about the rest of the OMPF? Is it important? Once I've seen the DD 214, can I throw the rest in the trash? Absolutely not. We definitely want to look through the rest of the OMPF. You know, so we were talking about that first overall chronology. What do we want? What do we want in that skeleton outline? Well, your duty stations and assignments are going to be found hopefully in the OMPF. You're also going to find performance reviews, which can give you insight into the veteran's functioning at a specific point in time. And you're going to want to pay attention to any changes within those performance reviews. Alongside with that, disciplinary records can be anything from restrictions to non-judicial punishments or NJPs, counseling sessions, or it could be an investigation. You know, if you have a veteran that was involved in a court-martial, you're going to want to request those records if they're not already included in your case file. Also, pro tip that I mistook when I was first doing my records review, I thought that counseling was like a very nice sit down with almost like a military guidance counselor, and it was like a therapy session, and how wonderful of them to try to talk this issue out with the veteran. No, it is not a therapeutic event. It is in fact a disciplinary warning in the military. So that just highlights the importance of learning that kind of military vernacular and lingo so that you don't make a mistake in your case. Also, this might seem like a small thing, but people who are listed as the next of kin on their various like emergency contacts and things like that, well, those people might be able to provide lay statements in the future in support of a claim. You know, who is this veteran close to during their time of service, so close to where they put them as their emergency contact? You know, that may or may not be true, but it gives you a place to start when you're looking for lay evidence and lay statements. You can also look at their different various entrance documents, like their school transcripts, to see and get a window into the functioning of the veteran before service. You know, were they an A student and then having all of the, and you know, engaged in extracurricular activities and doing really well before service, and then once they're in service they start having disciplinary issues, maybe due to PTSD. That can kind of give you a little bit of an insight into the veteran's functioning before service. And then what's our next big portion? It is service treatment records or service medical records. And we have some of Mr. Neil Armstrong's service treatment records. His, I believe it's his, one of his physical examinations here. So the service medical records, including the treatment records, are kind of the first medical records that an advocate should analyze when you're assessing a claim. Whether or not a disability or a symptom of a condition is noted in service treatment records often impacts the VA's decision to either grant or deny the disability. And when you're looking through the SMRs or the STRs, you should analyze this first enlistment exam, this entrance report, and figure out, were there any pre-existing conditions, or, was the presumption of soundness made at this time? Am I going to go with an aggravation theory? That can all give you a little bit of insight into those potential claims and various, prongs that you need to meet in order to be successful in your claim. You can also look at the significant injuries, illnesses, potentially chronic conditions that are related to your existing VA benefits claims, or maybe a future claim. If you see a lab result that you don't understand, don't just gloss over it. Like, you need to Google that, you need to look it up, you need to look it up in a medical dictionary, ask your professor, because you might see, and I think this has happened before to colleagues, where there might be a handwritten note on a dental record that talks about HGH positive. Okay, well, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means. Well, actually, that means that the veteran had a positive pregnancy test, and maybe that helps us corroborate her MST claim. So with that being said, you'll also want to look at and look up the uses of and potential secondary uses of prescriptions that are prescribed to the veteran in service. I know we're running low on time, so I'm just gonna wrap it up so we have time for a quick Q&A. And then also I just wanted to quickly mention that restrictions of duty can give you insight into maybe how severe the injury in service was, or how long it took them to heal. Definitely don't overlook those. So quickly, some special considerations for when you're working with a veteran who has a potential mental health claim or a military sexual trauma event in service. I quoted the regs here, but it's a list essentially of what kind of evidence can we use to corroborate the veteran's story and the veteran's experience, because when you're reviewing records that are related to mental health conditions and military sexual trauma, you're going to want to think outside of the box when it comes to corroborating in service, corroborating evidence, because obviously the stigma and the culture surrounding mental health condition really affects whether a veteran or a current service member at the time felt like they could report these issues or seek help. And so it's very rare that you will find, an outright police report claiming MST, or a veteran that goes to sick bay asking for help for their depression. So you'll want to look for creative ways that you can corroborate these types of claims. And so there's a list of examples which are cited in the regs. And then I also wanted to point out some potential psychosomatic symptoms. So physical manifestations of stress or mental health conditions that I found common in that you can find in records, whereas, a veteran might have dental records showing that they're grinding their teeth, but they might not have a record of them going to sick bay, saying that they have anxiety. So just be aware that you can really use your advocacy role to be creative when you're looking for evidence. Obviously, we want to remain truthful and candor to the court and all of our ethical concerns, which Professor Costello will go over tomorrow in the boot camp, but don't be afraid to think outside of the box when you're looking through these records. And so instead of doing our records review exercise, I'm just going to turn it over for the quick Q&A.
Thanks, Holly, and thanks, Matt. My first set of questions are about actually how to get the record. So I had some questions in the chat about the best way to get C files if you don't have VBMS access. So maybe Matt can answer this question, because I know he's done it without VBMS before. He got
I do remember the dark ages. Maybe I wouldn't be the best person, because I think there are still individuals who, for valid reasons or one or another don't have the access that I am loudly demanding from the VA at all times and better. So, but I do remember it was a nightmare because you could wait and wait and wait. I mean, there would be times where I would sign a client and say, well, I hope in a year or so from now, I might be able to tell you what I might be able to do, granted, based on, and that was also a time when the VA wasn't moving on the appeal for that long either. So if I filed a notice of disagreement or an appeal, I knew that the VA wasn't going to act anyway. So it was okay to sign a client and say, I'm going to make every request I can think of. That's all the more reason to have a very good intake process in place so that you can front load all the work in the years that you're waiting or the months that you're waiting. I understand it's sped up now. So again, I'm not the best person to ask of how that might have changed in the years since, but yeah, electronic is just chef's kiss. I can't imagine. I don't want to imagine going back. But if you have anything on that, Holly, please.
I mean, you can request the C file. If I remember the form correctly, it might be 3288. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. That might be the VA Medical Center records request form, but you can request the C file. You can also request, instead of requesting the full C file and waiting that, many, many months or potentially a year to get the C file, if you want to get started, you can make a records request to the NPRC for the military records and the in-service records, if that's where the veterans records are being kept through an SF-180 form, or you can request, if the veteran has been seen at a VA medical center, requesting records that way. You'll get it in bits and pieces versus the nice C file that's all in one, but it might be a little bit quicker. Otherwise, yes, I feel your pain with the waiting of C files.
I thought of something that I would suggest then in my, now that I've had time to digest the question, I would probably go directly to a senator or some kind of government official that would help and just say, listen, the line isn't as long for these kinds of requests, so you should be able to do this very quickly. That's probably what I would do, is I would make sure that, and as a clinic, I would make sure that relationship with the local senator, congressman, houseman, it doesn't have to be, it could be your local government officials as well. They sometimes have those connections too. So I would probably just skip straight to that if I was relying on the mail.
The next question I have is for Holly. What records are not typically in the OMPF? I know you mentioned a couple types of records that you may have to go out and search additionally for personnel records that may not have made it into the OMPF.
Well, there's two, usually I think court-martial records are something that you're going to want to request if the veteran has been involved in a court-martial record. That's something that you'd want to request outside of your SF-180 form. But also, I would highly suggest that when you fill out that SF-180 form or you fill out your military records request, that you put full OMPF, no extract, so that they don't send you the extract. That's been a kind of practice tip that I've learned as well.
What should a student do if the records that were in St. Louis but were burned in the fire? What should the student do with that client and trying to figure out what records would be relevant for that client?
Go ahead, Holly.
I have not come into this in my practice yet. If Matt has any experience with that. I do know that you'll want to look up the regs, that there might be a reg that specifically talks about if the records are unavailable due to no fault of the veteran. I know that specific, special rules can apply within that certain situation. But just generally, if you have a lack of in-service records or of medical records, you're going to want to look at what's my best lay evidence and lay statements that I can get.
It's been some years since I had that also come up. So I believe the few times it's come up, I would suggest the same as Holly. You at a certain point, once you believe, first of all, don't take them at their word, but once you believe that you can confirm that, in fact, on a secondary basis, that the records may not be available, you just got to lean hard into lay and secondary evidence and say, we've just got to get as many people in your life on record to make up for the lack of documentation.
I have another question, but it's more of a practice tip that we'd like from you. What do you do when a client story doesn't quite meet the records, right? The client's telling you one thing and the records are telling you another story. How do you deal with that conflict?
I just signed a case recently. Some of you may have heard me talking about it, but this comes up if your client ever gets accused of fraud, or in their medical records, you see that they're on narcotics and at some point they become accused of being labeled drug seeking. I will give my client the benefit of the doubt first, and I will give them the opportunity to lose my trust. And so for any difference that I see, any conflict, first of all, you definitely can't let it lie. So you have to bring it up. So for example, I'm going to show them the record and I'm going to say, well, you told me this at intake, but can you see how maybe the VA's decision is a little more understandable, seeing as how this is how your records read. The two aren't meeting up, and you just attack that elephant in the room head on. So I will give them the opportunity, and I'm, again, often I'm surprised, even when it looks like, oh my gosh, oh, my client, how could you do this to me? I'm surprised at the times that they rehabilitate themselves or rebut even the suspicion by saying like, oh yeah, I remember that. I had to go to the patient advocate because that particular treatment provider was a problem for me, just as a, it was a one-off encounter. But there's good chances it'll come up. And again, patient advocate and the VA FOIA offices themselves are relationships to make and strike and keep good, because you may find a time where you need to put in the veteran's version of events. And I can't remember, again, the regulation off the top, but there's a regulation where if VA relied on information that you believe is erroneous that's in the record, you can have the opportunity to flag that and get it corrected. And then of course, you have the hump to get over after that of getting the VA to then get on board. But provided you can do that, you just got to face it head on. But I'm always gonna not believe the VA first, and always gonna give my client the benefit of the doubt first. They're gonna have to lose my trust before I do that. But that's a great due diligence question, which is again why you want to have your hands on as much information as possible. The way records read in private medical records can sometimes just be night and day from VA medical records, right? VA, oh no, everything's fine, such and such. The private medical record from the same day is, the most severe condition you've ever seen. So, yeah.
I would also just suggest looking at it, it's very common that survivors of trauma might have memory issues. Also, I mean, if this is a Vietnam veteran, like I can't remember what I ate for lunch yesterday, let alone all the facts and details of someone that has served many years ago, or who has gone through a traumatic experience, or who might be self-medicating with substances. So just try to remember to look at your client with some empathy, and have that always that kind of lens when you're addressing the situation.
Those are great pointers, and I'm glad you brought up the MST and potential trauma stressor that can cause memory issues. And the last question I have, Matt, what was the application you used for your searching? Because now I'm on the lookout.
Kofax, Kofax. I think it's $150 per license. What I like is it's not a cloud product like Adobe where you're like locked in. I don't know if anybody works with Adobe, but I prefer the old school style of buying something and owning that license, I'm sure they could take it at any point, but it's more like the old Office and the old, where it's not like you have to pay every year to update it. Once you pay the 150, you've got it for life, which I guess is more towards the practitioners talking to their budget and accounting offices and saying, let's get something like that. But yeah.
Thank you. And I think I'm turning it back over to Michelle.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much. That was fantastic. And we just want to thank everyone for coming today. I'm going to quickly share my screen with the agenda. At the very bottom, we want to, of course, remind you of tomorrow. We have some excellent presentations. We have some practitioners who were former students, like many of you, and they want to come and join you, and a wonderful ethics presentation by Professor Peggy Costello from Mercy as well. But we also want to remind you about the ones that are going to be up on our website for the members of our consortium. There's another one from Margaret Kuzma. There was one from last year, but there'll be another one this year with one of her chapters of the new book that was referred to earlier today, and some other wonderful handouts, a lot of military memos that are great for you to have as resources. Then Jennifer Morel did one on disability ratings that kind of introduces you to the whole concept of a rating, which we didn't have last year. I do a little bit more on the AMA and sort of the process, and I spot some issues for you if you're doing any appeals as you go up the chain of administrative law. We have another great one on advocating before the Board of Veterans Appeals on remand. So after you've been up to the CAVC court, and then one on veteran naturalization. The first one from Judy Clausen at Florida, and then Nicole Godfrey at the Veterans Consortium. So we're really excited about those and want to put a plug in for those. We didn't want to extend this to be quite as long as we had last year. So that's why we did those as resources you can refer to on your own time. So thank you all so much for being here. Hillary, do you have anything to add? We're actually finishing 2 minutes early.
No, just wanted to remind those of you who work in the character of discharge area that there's a call here shortly about the proposed regulations. You should have received an email from Dana Montalto about that. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks everyone.